Chocho sampo pagyu trashi pa tuche tempe trinle yarngoda pelge drolor zambe zeparache palden lame shabla solvade Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munisha Sanekar Utta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajra Shasane Karma Utta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munisha Sanekar Utta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Munisha Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Pakyuke Kudandagi Lu Pakyuke Sundandagi Nga Pakyuke Tudandagi Tenyerme Chiktu Chingi Lu Makyuke Kudandagi Makyuke Sundandagi Makyuke Tugdandagi Tenyerme Chiktu Chingi Om Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha Om Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha Om Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha Sashibheki Chushime To Chamare Rabalingashi Nide Gempadi Sange Shintu Mikte Ulvarki Drokuna Namanda Shingla Chöpar Shoyidam Guru Ratna Mindrala Kam Niryatayami Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Janchu Pardo Dani Kyapsu Che Dage Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Druparash Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Janchu Pardo Dani Kyapsu Che Dage Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Druparash Shua Sangye Chedan Tsogi Chonam La Jancho Pardo Dani Kyab Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Drola Pinchira Sangye Drupa
in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Good morning. A few years ago, many years ago, when I started to study more, understand more about Buddhism, I had an attitude that was very, I really wanted to see Buddhism and see what Buddhism taught. And many years later, I saw that to understand certain things well, I needed to not look towards something that we can call religion or the philosophy, but I saw that actually a large part of what I found within the teachings of Buddhism mirrored somehow a, a better version of what I already had myself. In other words, what Buddha transmitted was was perfectly in it was coherent with what is already existent in life. For example, when we take things that were transmitted more than 2,000 years ago, or even 1,500 years, depending on the text, they're extremely current because they touch fundamental qualities of ours. But for me, before going to see the actual points about Buddhism, it's important to observe a little bit these aspects as we live them now. And I'll try to explain myself a little bit better. For example, there are three things that we can summarize our life, the system in which we live. It can be summarized in three ways: our worldview, the rules of conduct, and the techniques that we have of so-called familiarizations, the things that we do. We can traditionally use the term meditation, the things that we do to reach a certain objective. And if we look, we, wanting or not, we have our own worldview. Within our worldview, in other words, it's our paradigm that we live. Within this worldview, there are fundamental points. And in Buddhism, we call them the Four Noble Truths, for example. What for us should be avoided? What do we recognize as suffering and therefore should be avoided? What do we recognize as the causes of this suffering? In other words, we ask ourselves, why do we suffer? What is happiness? Where do we project our happiness? And consequently, what should we do to be happy and to not suffer. Whether we're aware of it or not, I mean, we have an answer to these four questions within our daily life. It's something that we naturally do, naturally try to be happy. We try to avoid suffering. We try to find a coherence between what we do daily and what we want. But the worldview determines, it's where we see where we think happiness is, what suffering is for us. This is a fundamental point. And there are many other aspects that have to do with how we see reality. The worldview is fundamental because according to how we live reality, that determines how we interact with the world. Let me give you an example that's important for me. In our worldview, for example, are we a part of nature or do we possess nature? Do we own nature? As human beings, are we one of the many living beings on the planet? All the same as equal to all beings, or are we something superior? One thing is what we think conceptually, and something else is how we live it. And our worldview, there's a very interesting part. A large part of our paradigm is something that we inherited from our social, cultural context in which we grew up. The example I've given many times is the example of the pink and blue. What's the color of baby boys and baby girls? For the boys, we dress them in blue and girls in pink. Why? Because that's the way it is. But actually, there's a whole story that it comes from 1918, and then 1920. There was a marketing campaign that was set up to promote these two colors for boys and girls. And before that, what was the color of clothing for children before the Industrial Revolution? Cream, taupe, the natural color of the cloth, and because dyed cloth was very, very expensive, and only the very wealthy and nobles dressed with dyed colored cloth. Even in the life of Saint Francis, there's this scene where he refuses the wealth and he throws the dyed expensive cloth from the window. But with the Industrial Revolution, dyed textiles became accessible to everyone or to more people. And it's interesting because there also marketing came out, because so to keep the production machine going, what keeps a high production together is a consumption. But how can I make you buy something that you don't need? By creating unreal needs. Before, how often would people buy clothes? As long as they lasted. And then there was maybe one outfit for high holidays or parties. So what would happen in 1918 when textiles, dyed textiles became much more accessible? This is in the United States. So the marketing of the time decided that for girls, girls should dress in blue and boys should dress in pink because they were following the trends of the noble French. Because in France at that time, men dressed in pink. It was a color of strength, and the baby blue was considered to be softer. And so in 1918, they sell pink for pink for boys and blue for girls. And 2 years later, they needed to find a way to sell more cloth, so they inverted the colors. So this marketing campaign in 1920, pink for girls and blue for boys. And I imagine that they couldn't do that every 2 years. And now, and now it's 103 years later, and we're still there. But there are many other aspects. There's one that's strongly connected to our environment, our worldview, our paradigm. We can divide these between two types. They're animists and humanists. The difference is they have a worldview where the human being is as worthy as any other animal. So the life of a human or a dog or a tree or a goat, we're all on at the same level. And there's no attitude of superiority one towards the other. And this is the widest view before the agriculture. Then the humanist view, which is the most widespread among us, where human beings are at the center and everything is justified as being at the service of humans. So we went from a generalized humanistic view to an individualistic view, where everything has to be at the service of the I and the my, and not the social larger group. So we have two views where humans are one among many, and then in the other view, the humans are at the center. And in this humanistic view, nothing means anything if it's not in relation to human beings. Things only matter, and we can spend hours and hours talking about this, but my objective here is not to talk about animistic views or humanistic views, but just to reflect on the idea that we have a worldview, and often we're not aware of this. And if we asked ourselves, between these two, which one are we part of? Do we have an animist view or a humanistic view? Humanistic. And then given the environmental problems that we're living, and most of them come from this attitude where all of nature is seen as natural resources, something that exists at the service of human beings and needs of human beings. Many people are little by little trying to have a different view, trying to give value to the animist view, showing how the humanistic view is very arrogant and detrimental. But what I mean to say is that we all, and what I want to underline is that we all have our own paradigm, and it's fundamental for us to look into our own worldview. to understand what are the fundamental pillars that uphold our paradigm. I think we have some aspects that are fundamental. There's a basis that is humanistic, where humans are at the center. There's a basis also based on the monotheistic view, capitalism. And then there's another basis, foundation, in which we were raised, is a view, scientific, but based on, is a materialistic, mechanical, like Newtonian view. Let's talk about time, for example. Time, as we live it today, something we just take for granted. An hour is an hour, a day is a day. We live time as if it existed on a relative plane or an absolute plane. We think about it as being absolute, but Newton actually invented absolute time. It's something that before didn't exist. Time was always something relative, according to who was living it, where was living it. Even an hour, up until just a few years ago, there wasn't the hour that was the same for everyone. When did they start making watches, seeing time with trains? Before, every village had a clock that would ring every hour, or number of hours to show the important moments of the day. Waking up and meal time and going home from the fields. And it was interesting that every village, every city, this is just until a short time ago, the clock of the village corresponded, like noon, corresponded to the sun. And so when you would go from one city to another, time, noon, was different. But people traveled by walking, by carriage, so there wasn't this feeling of difference. When they invented trains, there was the problem of when the train would leave and when should it arrive. And at that point, with the radio, they invented, together with the trains, this ability to synchronize the clocks in the main squares. So the noon no longer corresponded to the noon of the sun. And when they invented telex and international communication, needed to develop an international time zones. So here we created the time zones. At first, they suggested one time for the entire planet. So it would be 11 o'clock everywhere. Everywhere in the world, regardless of whether it was daylight or nighttime. But people were used to noon being daylight, so they had to adapt. But it's interesting that even just a short time ago, there wasn't even the concept of minutes. One lived, their relationship to time was very different. So when we observe that even the concept of time, the way we live it today, is something new, constructed, it's part of our worldview. We grew up within this view and we're strongly influenced by it. And it's interesting that these influences, we don't question them, we take them for granted. Right? So in, based on the worldview we have, we establish rules of conduct. The rules of conduct determine how we live our day, so that we can avoid suffering and have more happiness. The way we communicate with others, our lifestyle, etc. And then beyond our rules of conduct, what you can do, what you can't do. Every country has its own rules. Every family has its rules. Every society. And within that, we then have some things that should be done to help us uphold these rules and live a life that's coherent with our view. And so every society is made up of these three aspects: worldview, rules of conduct, and techniques. Prayer, music, meditation, exercise, sacred art, things that people do to direct themselves in a certain way. So when we talk about Buddhism, for me, it's important, very important to see that it's made up of a worldview, rules of conduct, and techniques of familiarization. Personally, I don't see it feasible. I don't see it feasible to look at what Buddha, to have a worldview, and then so this process within Buddhism is transforming our paradigm, and I don't see it feasible to have a paradigm that it is not coherent with then our conduct or our familiarization. In Buddhism, when Buddha taught, he taught what's called the 4 pillars, the 4 seals. And when he taught it differently depending on who was listening. And sometimes it seems almost contradictory because he found himself in different contexts with people with different abilities. So when Buddha left his body, his disciples met, and there was a problem because one would say, Buddha told me this, and then someone else would say, well, Buddha told me that. And from there, 4 first schools of thought were created. The first one's actually divided into 18 different schools. The second is divided into 2, and each one again into 2. The third divided into 2, and the fourth also divided into 4. Vaibhasika, Sautantrika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamika. The first one, Vaibhasika, divided into 18. Those are 18 different places where Buddha taught. Different places. They're similar but different because it was adapting to local tradition where there are also the monastic rules. So these 18 traditions have 18 different monastic traditions. It's not that he created one list and said, this is for everyone for always. I mean, already at his time, there were 18 different systems because they were different cultures, different ways of seeing. One of the strongest differences in one of the traditions, some of these traditions, the monastic views were taken, and today is like this, forever. You take them, and for your whole life, I mean, the day that you give up, if you were to give up your vows, then you could never take them again in this life. In another tradition, Buddhist tradition, the one we call it the Theravada, that's present in Thailand, for example, monastic traditions can be taken for a specific amount of time, even a week. and then then it finishes, and then I can take them for 3 months, and then later for a whole year. It's all possible. In the second wave, when it arrived, when the second wave of Buddhism to Tibet with Atisha in the 11th century, Atisha had the vows like the Theravada, but the king of Tibet said to Atisha, the Tibetan people are extremely wild. So we need rigid rules. And I could imagine at the time, I could imagine in Brazil, for example, oh, I'll take monastic vows for the whole year except for carnival time. No. So the king said we need the most rigid vows possible. And so that's where other vows, other systems were developed. And just to give you an idea how Buddha taught in different ways, depending on different mindsets. To some disciples, Buddha said, refuge is what you actually recite, independently of what you think. And to others, he said, what you recite is not important. What's important is what you think. So they're in contradiction. So who's right? And each one says, well, I'm going to follow what I was told. For those who did not, perhaps those who weren't ready to generate a certain mental state, then he said it doesn't matter what you think. Sooner or later the mind follows our speech. So it's said that his teachings are like steps of a staircase. If you look at each step is in a different position, but you need each step to move up. And so everything that he transmitted, even if different, went in the same direction. And when all these teachings were put together, there were 4 fundamental points called the 4 seals. So what are the 4 common points? So that all Buddhist views have to have, because we have these 4 schools of thought that are divided into 18, 4, 2, and 2. So what determines a Buddhist paradigm that makes reference to Buddhist teachings? These 4 seals. They are common among all traditions. There can be some slight different interpretations, but they're common to all of them. And now we'll look at them quickly. Then Buddhism developed in various cultures. And being a worldview, the cultural part is less and less important. That's why we have Buddhism in Tibet, in Mongolia, and Southeast Asia, Thailand, or there's the Mahayana Buddhism of Vietnam and Japan. There are many different traditions that adapted to the times and the culture, but at the basis, there's a world view and a worldview, rules of conduct, and techniques that are in. So today I wanted to go to the basis that we can then adapt in different ways. The 4 seals, the 4 pillars. The 4 seals. And du, Duce tamce metapa. All composed phenomenon are impermanent. This is the first of the seals. Let's try to understand this. Let me give you an example, a simple example. Just a minute. Oh, look how cute. Okay. Can you see this piece of tissue paper? Even with little drawings. Are you able to see it well? More or less. Can you imagine it now? What is it made of? It's tissue, more or less. The shape. Okay, it's a rectangle, and it's cut. It's torn on the side. Is it the same as before? Is it still the same? Well, I mean, I can spend all day doing this. It's still the same. Okay. And now, if you tell me that it's the same, then I ask you to lend me your car, and I'll bring it back to you in pieces, and you can tell me if it's the same or different. So is it the same or is it different? The first times that I showed the tissue, it seemed as if it were the same, as if it hadn't changed. But what happens is the following: everything that we see and we perceive in every instant is in constant transformation. Mitakpa in Tibetan. Mi means is a negation. Takpa is static. So it's not static. It's in constant transformation. The definition of mitakpa is kechik kechik gijikpa. Kechik kechik jikpa. So from one instant, kechik from instant to instant. Ki is a grammatical particle that shows the verb. So what happens from instant to instant? Jikpa is a transform. So in constant transformation from instant to instant. So when we see the tissue paper, the Kleenex, or when we meet someone and then we go to see that person the next day, are we expecting to see the same person or someone else? No, the same person. But every time I showed you the Kleenex, it seemed like it was the same. But if we philosophize, if we analyze, is the tissue in constant transformation or not? Does it become old from one moment to the next, or does it little by little fade away? A flower, for example, or take anything. If we took a microscope, I mean, is there movement or not? There's a transformation that's constant. So what happens is when we see reality around us, even if it's a reality that's in constant transformation, therefore impermanent, it appears to us as if it were permanent. And we're able to perceive the change only when that change is so great that the mental image that we attribute to it, the meaning, the concept that we attribute, can no longer be sustained. For example, can you remember the original Kleenex that I showed you? That mental image, can you still access it? And you have access also to the one you generated after. So when a mental image can no longer be supported by the object, we say that it has changed. As long as the object can sustain our mental image, we say that the object is the same. Or rather, our mind works that when we see something, light it comes, different frequencies come to our eyes, depending on the form of the object and the position. The light reflects differently, and that shows us form and color. And also, when someone talks, it's a vibration in the air, and depending on the vibration, we perceive it in different ways, and we can hear what is said. And we can go on with this. What happens is when we come into contact with an object and we make a kind of photograph of that moment, and to that photograph, what do? We attribute a meaning. Or I see something, I do inner research to identify what it is, and based on my previous experience and knowledge, I say this is Kleenex. I create a mental image of that tissue. This is this. As long as that object is able to uphold that mental image, then we say that it hasn't changed, even though it's constantly changing. Are you following? So in just a few words, the more generalized our image is, the less we'll be able to perceive change. The more detailed our perception is, the more easily we'll be able to see the changes. When we know someone really well, for example, we're able to see small changes. Say like, "Oh, what happened to you?" Or why like this? Or you've gained weight. Or but in someone has an image that's more general. They don't notice these aspects, and it seems like if the person's always the same, but it actually, the reality around us appears to us spontaneously as if it existed permanently, when instead our reality is impermanent. Are you following up to here? This is a very important concept within Buddhist teachings. In the same way, as things appear as being permanent, but actually aren't, reality appears. Everything that we perceive, objects, people, situations, they appear as, do they appear within their complex interdependence, or do things appear as being autonomous and independent? What's our direct perception? What does the tree have to do with me? It's there. I'm here. We see things, and everything that appears, it appears as being permanent and independent from everything else. It's there. But that first seal says everything that we can perceive, everything that is composed, which means everything that interacts, inevitably is impermanent. There's a rule also in physics that says wherever there's interaction, inevitably there's transformation. It's not possible for there to be interaction without transformation. In Buddhism, we say all composed phenomena. Composed is that which depends on causes and conditions. That, in other words, what interacts, is impermanent. Impermanent means that it's in constant transformation. So why do things transform? Why? Because they interact. So on a practical level. That everything is in constant movement. As soon as something begins, it starts to finish. And this concept of beginning is a concept. It's just a concept. It's a value that has been. It's a label. This bottle, for example. When did this bottle arise? When was it born? Created? When they took the sand, they heated the sand, transformed it into glass, and that glass was made into a certain form to hold liquid. And once that happened, the bottle was created. But the bottle was created from nothing, or was the transformation of something else? It was transformation. So sand died and was reborn as bottle. Okay, following? But the sand came from nothing, or is a transformation of something else? And the sand of where? There are sands that are results of stones and boulders. Some come from shells. I don't know. We need to call a geologist here to explain the story of sand. But each one of those parts has its own story. So if we tried, is there a primordial beginning of this bottle? Or is it nothing other than a constant flow of transformation? So what determines a beginning and an end? An attributed value, a concept. Is this clear? So everything is in constant transformation, like a constant flow. And to interact with this flow, we divide it into blocks. This begins here and ends there because we relate to everything through concepts. So let's go back to the tissue. Can we remember that first tissue that I showed you? You still have that mental image, and you have the one that came after. And here there's a point that mental images are not impermanent. They're actually permanent. They're not in constant transformation. And that's why even if the object has changed, we're able to make a new mental image. Because if the second one were just were a transformation of the first, we wouldn't be able to access it. Can you follow that? So when we generate new mental images, it's not that that first one then transforms into the next. There's one, and then at a certain point, another one arises. And we can have many mental images. So the correct philosophical term is generalized meaning. These are permanent phenomena. They're not in constant transformation. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because we inevitably relate to impermanent reality through mental images that are permanent. And when we think of someone, for example, actually, what is our object of perception? The mental image of that person, or the actual person? The mental image of that person. When we go and see that person, who do we think we're going to meet? The mental image that we have, or the person with all of his changes. What happens when the person doesn't match the mental image that we had? We say, oh, how is it that you've changed? You shouldn't be like this. And if we put a person in the middle and 50 people around, and each one around describes that person, are we going to have different mental images or 50 different ideas, mental images? So we live in a reality that is impermanent and constant transformation. It's also interdependent. Nothing exists in an autonomous way, independent from anything else, and nothing exists that indifferent in the sense that nothing exists in a way that doesn't interact with other phenomenon and that then produces transformation. Remember that interaction is never unilateral as we're interacting here. It's reciprocal on many levels. We're interacting. I'm talking, you're listening, you're interacting among yourselves. We're in contact with colors and light and sounds and smells, and every interaction brings a transformation. Okay? So, one of the first fundamental points that Buddha transmitted is that we live in a reality that is in constant movement, where every small part determines the whole. And this is translated in the so-called law of karma. Or rather, we have this tendency that when we experience something, we ask ourselves why. We, as human beings, we like so much to ask why. I mean, we're animals too, but I wonder if other animals ask themselves why. Why did this happen? I think we just play so many mental games. Useless. Because we try constantly, we look for a coherence between what we experience and our logical comprehension. And this asking why, one tendency is also to look for the one to blame. If there's something wonderful, why is it like this? But more often when there's something negative, we look for the reason, the one to blame, don't we? Let's imagine something. A very complex equation. And everyone choose a number. And we get to a result. Let's say the result is the number 8. And someone said, oh, I wanted it to be 16 as a result. Who is to blame for the result of 8? Who chose the wrong number that brought us to 8 as a result? Is there a guilty one? If any one of you had chosen a different number, wouldn't we have gotten to a number other than 8? Of course. So actually, every number of the result is responsible for the result. There is no guilty party. We can say all and none. Are you following? So in a view that takes into consideration the interdependence and the fact that we live in a system that is constantly in interaction, where there's nothing linear, we see that every part is responsible for the result of the whole. So there is no guilty party. There's a whole of causes and conditions that bring that result. And this view brings us that, number one, we don't go looking for the one to blame, but we recognize also the power in every choice. And so if I want the equation to give a different result, I need to change the numbers within, or add instead of subtract, or multiply instead of divide, instead of looking for the guilty one. At the same time, I recognize that every interaction brings a transformation, and I'm responsible as a person for my interactions. doesn't mean that everything I live is a result only of what I do, because my actions add up with the actions of others, with the interactions with other people, other beings, which is infinite. But my choices are determining for what I experience. And if I want to experience something different, the only thing I can do is to interact differently. The law of karma. Karma literally means action. And we could almost translate it as interaction. Wherever there's an action, there's transformation. And it's obvious that we're influenced by the actions of others with whom we interact. But our choices determine mostly what we experience. So that first seal, even if reality appears to us as being permanent, it's actually impermanent. And it's impermanent because it transforms, because it interacts. So every small action has a power, a potential. When we're living a difficult situation, when we see something that we don't agree with, I imagine that each one of us could write a long list, on a personal list, a familial list, a list that has to do with our society, our culture, our nation, the international. Are there things in the world that you would like to be different? We could spend all day long listing these. There are things, sure, but maybe someone asks, why are things like this? Why is there war? Why is there poverty? Why is there violence? Why is there the destruction of the environment? I don't know if you've ever asked yourself these questions. Let's remember something, that very often the question is often more important than the answer, because depending on how we ask the question, we're looking for a certain type of answer. But often the answer is wrong because the question at the basis is wrong. Let's go back to our equation. So our result is 8. I like 8. But let's say I don't like 8 and I look for the guilty one. Can I find the guilty one among all of you who've chosen the number? And if I choose one person as the guilty one, because if this person, following this logic, if this person had chosen a different number, then we would have a different result. So the problem there is, the problem is not in the result, in the answer, but in the question. The question is there a guilty one? No, so no need to go look for one. Remember, we got to this result. We got to this result of 8 because among the interaction of everyone, that interaction brought the result of 8. So that means that any different part would bring a different result. I don't know if you see the differentiation, the difference in the solution in this case. If for me the problem is one person, then the solution has to do with that guilty one. If the problem is caused by the whole of all the parts, where each one played a part, then the solution to make it different is much wider, because that means that any one of the players choosing a different number would bring a different result. So this worldview, where everything interacts with everything else and is in constant transformation, this brings us to a worldview where we don't have to, we would never say, oh, well, it's because it's like this. No, there's constant transformation. There's no guilty one on a personal level or on a international level. There's a complex interaction, one part that interacts with another, where we can, within our interactions, we can make a difference. Okay? And at the same time, this brings us to another level of responsibility, because everything I say, everything that I choose, that I think, it's an interaction that I have with myself and with the world around me that brings transformation and a very high level of responsibility. Is this clear up to this point? But it's a difference in paradigm that is important. So if we want to go in this direction, let's be careful about the kinds of questions or how we formulate questions. If so, the first point of the paradigm is that everything interacts, is impermanent. All composed phenomena are impermanent. The first seal. We can't ask ourselves anymore, why is there, what's the reason? No, we can ask, what are the reasons? And look at the whole, what brought this result, understanding that every small aspect it plays a part in the result. This paradigm also brings us another concept, which is the same, but shows us another perspective, and from my point of view is fundamental, and sometimes it's interpreted in a way that is wrong, and from my point of view. Sometimes Buddhism is seen as a worldview that is, how can you say, passive. There's a kind of acceptance, passive acceptance, and it's not exactly like this. Let me explain. If we repeat that equation that we did before again and again with the same numbers, the result should be the same, right? I repeat the same equation, I should get to the same result. So the result of that equation is perfect. Perfect, not understood in the sense that it's what I want, but understood that given all of those numbers and mathematical formulas, that result is perfect. Now let's look at our own lives. Our life in this present moment, is it perfect or is it just random? I know it's hard to say. It's perfect. I mean, your life, is it perfect? Yes. Understood. In the sense that what you are living now, what I am living now, on an individual level and on a collective level, can't be anything other than this, given all the causes and conditions and the interactions that have come up to now. Except that what happens is this equation is in constant movement, because each number is constantly in transformation but if we take a photograph of one specific instant, that moment is perfect. That result is perfect. And it doesn't stay like that, because each part of the equation is in constant interaction and constant transformation. So if we were to photograph our life in this present instant, our life is perfect. What does this mean on a practical level? I need to accept what I am. It doesn't mean to get into to become passive and think, well, I'm like this, so I can't do anything about it. It doesn't mean living a situation. It's like this, and it will always be like this. There's this idea. It's kind of modern. I think it's a little bit that is quite wrong to say, oh, this I'm like this. You need to accept me for who I am. Well, yes, I need to accept you, but you don't need to accept yourself. This idea of accepting the present moment, I make that photograph of this present moment. The equation, the result is perfect, but every interaction brings a transformation. So I accept this present moment, which means I don't oppose the present moment. And also, that means also not in the past. And I direct myself with awareness, with determination towards the future that I want. Because every interaction brings a transformation. And if I want to get there, I need to walk in that direction. What is future, for example? Or where can we find the future today? In our imagination. This morning, when you were coming here, this moment was in your future. You imagine, I'm going to Albagnano, etc., etc. Even me too. I woke up this morning, oh, today there are teachings, an introduction to Buddhism. That was my future. That future is nothing other than imagination. So what do we do in that case? Someone imagine that that day you'll do that thing. One sends information, you share that information. One comes into contact with that information and imagines what is going to happen. The fact that I imagine that to happen, that allows me to act for that thing to happen. Because for this moment to exist, many of us had to do many things. It's not so obvious. You needed to set aside other commitments. You needed to organize your travel. You need to maybe organize your children. Who's taking care of the children or the animals. For this moment to be as it is, we imagined a future, and for that future to become a reality, to become our present, we made many, many choices directed in that went in that direction. The future is fundamental. It's very important because it's our future where we imagine what we want to happen, and that determines how we act in our present, what we do to actualize that thing. One of the most important aspects in our lives is the future. What do I want? Where do I want to go? Who do I want to be? That's the fourth seal that we'll see after. But that's fundamental because I accept the present and I direct myself towards the future. When we look at the life of other people around us, and you ask yourselves, that person with all of his characteristics, is he perfect, or is he's like that for no reason at all? Oh, no, he's perfect. Our social situation, our actual current situation, is it perfect? Yes. Not that the conflicts and the problems don't exist, but what does this mean? That means the person that I interact with is perfect. That means that I don't oppose, but I imagine, how would I like you to be for my good, for your good, for the common good. I think it would be better if you didn't act in this way, or that you had a better lifestyle, etc. We can't change others, but we can interact with others to try somehow to help others to make those changes himself. So I accept you for who you are, but I direct myself to help you become better. So I accept the social situation that's in present. I can't go in opposition of what is already there, but I direct myself to a future that I want. I try to change the present by constructing a different future. And the attitude here changes. For example, how much time in our lives, how much space, how much energy is used up looking at the past, re-suffering the past. Because this morning you said this, but I was so, you said you would take me, and I was so, and I ended up late, and then I wasn't able to do this, and then because when I was 18 this happened, because my mother, my father, my auntie, my uncle, the school did this, whatever it is. A lot. When we stay in this process, we use up our energy, even physically. And number two, it blocks the ability, the possibility to go forward. So if we're able, for example, to see the world where our reality is what is, what's there is there, but what will be depends on what I do. I don't have the absolute power to change everything, but I am one of the many parts of a very complex equation, and my part will change the result related to my body, to my emotional state, my mental state. Another example of the worldview where we don't see impermanence. I'm very used to hearing and seeing, people come to me when there's something beautiful, then they say, "Oh, I hope that it'll stay forever like this." And even if it's something negative, we say, "Oh, I can't live this forever." So people would say, "Lama, I can't live like this forever." And I say, "No, don't worry, because it's not going to stay like this. It'll get better or it could get worse, but for sure it's going to change. So that's sure. So if it gets worse, then enjoy this. And if it gets better, then don't worry about now, because it'll get better." But what's sure is we spend a lot of time, an excessive amount of time, suffering from what has already been and pre-suffering for the future. Our physical state of being, is it just random, or is it the result of many interactions, lifestyle, many elements? And if I want to have a healthy body, I need to build it. So I set an objective and I walk towards that objective. Another fundamental point of this first seal is that the free will exists. Very, very small, but it exists. Because we're conditioned by our past and our past choices, or the experiences that we've lived, our interactions with others. We're conditioned by an infinite number of things, but within that, we have anyway this free will, the freedom of choice. Shall I go? Shall I not go? Shall I say this or not say this? Shall I show this feeling or not? And sometimes people tell me that they're having trouble because they don't know what the right choice is. And what's helped me. I've found a lot of relief and I've deeply relaxed in the certainty of the uncertainty of things. Let me repeat that. Personally, I've deeply relaxed in the certainty of uncertainty. Can anyone have the certainty of what's going to happen? So how can I make choices? By offering the best that I can. I do my best, knowing that in my best there'll be difficult moments and easier moments, and I don't put on my shoulders the expectation to make the perfect choice. Because when we try to make the right choice, we're trying to somehow to tell the future, and that's just not possible. So we give value to the present moment, looking towards the future. And here, this is the first seal. Are you following? So all composed phenomena are impermanent. Everything that interacts transforms. What's important for us to see is that even if conceptually it's coherent, our daily way of living is not coherent. We don't really live within this paradigm. So this would be a big change for us. The second seal, Sakche Tamche Dunalwa. So everything that is impure is of the nature of suffering. If I put on green-colored lenses and I go to the mountains where there's snow, what color will the snow be? Green. I see the world through filters, my own filters. I'm not able to perceive anything independently from myself. And we go back to that first point. Reality appears to us as if it existed objectively, as if what I live has nothing to do with me. But everything that we see, that we hear, that we touch, etc., every reality that we experience it through filters of ourselves. We have our emotions, we have our knowledge, we have our experiences, we have our physical, our physical health, all of this shaped by our experiences that we've lived, our social cultural upbringing, our education. This all shapes. These are all different filters through which we experience reality. In the first part of our life, mostly, when we're children, it's said that the first 6 months of our life are these moments where one lives, when one learns more than any other time in our life, when the mind is the most active. The first 6 months, and then the first 3 years, and then up to 7 years, from what I've understood. So in the first 6 months, we learned so much, and then up to 3 years, and then up to 6 years. That's why for me, so up to kindergarten, for example, kindergarten is much more important than university. Why? Let's look for an example. Let's take that same example as before, the bottle. So what is this? It's a bottle. Does anyone have a doubt? So when we take this object that we call
conoscere o dobbiamo riconoscerlo?
bottle, do we need to know it or do we need to recognize it? We've seen many bottles, but when we see a bottle for the very first time, what happens?
Abbiamo delle
We
informazioni,
have information, we have form, color, context, the sensation,
fra tutte
and
queste
among all of those, we learn a new concept. We're told that this is a bottle. So we know
la seconda
the
volta
bottle. The second time that I'm in front of that same object, I
riconoscere
recognize, I know the bottle. I don't need that process of understanding what it is in that first phase of life. We're knowing so many things. And among all the things that we learn to know, one of the most important is ourselves.
quindi man mano che
So as we grow, we develop an identity of ourselves.
più la nostra
The
visione
more
strutturata, più noi crediamo di
structured our worldview is, then the more we think we know things, and
conosciamo di meno.
as we go on, we recognize more and more, and we learn, we know less.
Crea,
So one creates a worldview
vive tutto
and lives everything through that. So what happens that during this process, what happens when,
diciamo che
let's say that
cercando di
I'm looking for a simple example.
per tanto tempo,
For
fin dall'inizio,
a long time, from the beginning,
per
let's say that
una sorta di punizione.
the glass was used as a punishment. So when you were punished, you would drink water with salt. What would happen at a certain point? Let's say that experience is finished, but when you're then faced with the glass, what is that object? That's the object that brings you back to that emotion of punishment. So it's an object to avoid. Even also because even if conceptually I know that that moment is finished, when I see it, it connects me to that worldview, to that emotion. I recognize, I know that. If at a certain point in my life I experience something like abandonment, something like a certain form of aggression,
E io sviluppo l'idea
and I develop an
che il problema è
idea that
che vediamo di noi stessi.
the problem isn't the glass. The problem is the identity that we develop of ourselves. As we go on in life, we stay trapped in that view.
E la cosa che è interessante
And what's interesting
è che man mano che
is that as the years go on,
posso dire,
how can I say,
quando io mi trovo davanti a qualcosa,
when I find myself faced with something, for me,
io conosco
what
quello che l'oggetto mi manifesta.
what I know already is worth more than what
Non
that object is actually showing. So,
io che sto attribuendo un valore sbagliato a
so
qualcosa che non vale nulla, perché io mi fido della mia esperienza.
I trust my experience, and so I can.
Stavolta il bicchiere non c'era il veleno, non sai mai.
I trust my experience, so I don't trust glass. I even okay. So this time there wasn't poison in the glass, but we're constantly experiencing the world through through the filters of our traumas, our experiences. And what's crazy, the craziest thing for me is that when we have a feeling, we look around us, we look for a kind of coherence with between what we feel and what we're experiencing. we create our worldview and we look for some kind of coherence for what we're experiencing, even creating situations that would support these feelings. For example, we're not able, on a physical level I'm talking, we're not able to see something for which there's not an inner correspondence. Or rather, if I don't have a concept for something, I won't see that. I will see I will see a union of a form and color, and I'll attribute a different name to it. If I have a very strong inner conflict or a void, a sense of dissatisfaction, of fear, sadness, abandon, a feeling of being abandoned or not trusting. Can I live the world around me independently from this? No. So everything that is impure is of the nature of suffering. Impure doesn't mean that objectively is impure. But when I perceive something, I'm polluting that thing with what? With my attachment, with my fears, with my anxieties, with my sadness, with my anger, resentment, a hatred. So as long as I pollute the world with my own inner conflicts, my so-called mental defilements, then those, sooner or later, that will translate into suffering. People sometimes say, Lama, I want to take a vacation from myself. And there are those who try. Because when you drink a lot, for example, or use certain substances, one function is to take a vacation from yourself. There's this tendency to want to get rid of, or to run away from certain feelings. So you can get drunk a little bit and numb yourself for a short amount of time, but then it comes back. Even Buddha himself, before he reached enlightenment, he tried many techniques of asceticism, where he tried to control his body, to look for a state of neutrality. He was able to reach different levels of different mental states where he was not even in contact with any feeling. I don't know if you've ever seen any like Indian ascetics, those, for example, who decide, for example, to close their fists and never open them again. So even the nails grow, actually they grow into one's own flesh, because they have this idea that if I control my body, I can control my mind and then get out of suffering. So Buddha said it's not really like that. But he saw that even if one gets into a very, very deep meditative state where there is no more suffering, but those meditative states end, and then then the suffering would come back like before. So he said, running away from suffering doesn't work. So as long as my filters are dirty, I will live the world as if it were dirty. As long as I have a deep sense of abandonment, I will feel abandoned. And what's interesting is not only will I look at the world as if I'm being abandoned, but I will unconsciously set myself up and create situations where I will actually be abandoned. So Buddha said, as long as we pollute with selfishness, this grasping at self, um, um, grasping at our selfishness and all our mental defilements like ignorance and hatred and jealousy, etc. Inevitably, there'll be suffering. In the paradigm that we live in normally, suffering on an emotional level inside, is it a result of the world around us, or is it a result of what we have inside? How do we live it normally? We're the victim of the world, right? If I'm not well, is it because I don't know how to be well, or because this happened, that happened, etc., etc.? Even if I'm not well today, it's because when I was a child they told me this, that, and they did this to me. And maybe this is true, but what happened that in my formation from a child, I created a way to see things in a certain way. But our inner experience is not a result of external reality, but the way we live external reality and the interactions and the choices that we make, those are result of our inner reality. For example, conflicts. If in a conflict where there are two sides involved, often both sides, each side sees itself as the victim, in the sense, if you hadn't done this, I wouldn't have done that. And I'm doing this because you did that. So I want to destroy you because you did this. And one of the craziest things about conflicts, it happens like this, no? I condemn your violent action towards me, and because you did something that you shouldn't have done, which is to act aggressively towards me, then I act aggressively towards you. And what do you do? And then you say, well, what you did to me is not good, so your violent action towards me, and we create this vicious cycle. And it's very, very difficult to come out of. Let's observe the conflicts that there are around the world on a micro level and also on a micro and macro. When I say micro, I mean at work, within our family, among friends, on a personal level, and up to these larger macro conflicts on an international level. Can you find one conflict that exists that came from one external reason and not from some inner feelings of those involved? I've never found that. If we were to highlight one primary cause for world conflicts, it's this obsession with self-gratification, our inability to see others and to cooperate instead of to compete. Right? But when there's a conflict, how does it appear to us that the result of that conflict is a result of our inner attitudes, or there are victims? It seems like that the conflict was created by something objective, external, instead of something internal and subjective. But as long as we live a situation as a victim, we can't be part of the solution. So one of the first fundamental steps along our path is to stop victimizing ourselves. I know that it's not easy, but it's fundamental. In the second seal, Buddha says the causes of suffering are not created from external conditions, but the way we live these external conditions and the ones we create as well. And with, when we talk about like the natural resources of the planet, I mean, the natural resources of the planet could be could be heaven, but what transforms heaven into hell? This obsession with self-gratification, unlimited attachment, dissatisfaction, hatred, anger, jealousy, fear, etc. Right? That's what Buddha said. Let's not look for the solution outside. We need to look for that solution within. And this is a very important change of paradigm. Starting from each one, because this doesn't mean this is not pointing the finger. And you all need to be less selfish. And you shouldn't act like this, that, and the other. Well, I don't do that. This same. No, it starts from ourselves. So the point is, as long as I continue to live my life in a way where I'm obsessed with the I and the my, where everything exists in function of the I and the my, inevitably I will keep living and trapped by my attraction and aversion that then brings all of the mental defilements of fear and anxiety and hatred and then suffering. And so my objective is no longer about. So this change of paradigm takes me to this change in paradigm. We see that we can't change others. We can't change outside, but I can change the way that I interact and live the experiences with you or with other external experiences. So we don't have expectations to change others. So this second seal is I need to change my inner reality that manifests itself as the external reality, which doesn't mean that external reality is not important, but it doesn't exist independently from my inner reality. And if I continue victimizing myself as if what I live within is a result of what is outside, then I won't be able to avoid the suffering. But when I change within, that will naturally bring a change outside. If there's a conflict with someone else, if I'm from within, I'm able to change my my hatred to neutrality and little by little respect, etc., etc. This will bring enormous changes. It starts from within and not from outside. The third seal. This is a very simple yet complex point. It says all phenomena are empty and lack their own identity. Let's just simplify things. When we see something, we talked about the tissue paper before, person in front of us. When we perceive anything, the reality that we live, it appears to us as being objective or subjective. When I see you, do I think that I'm seeing you or my version of you without philosophizing? If you ask,
Vedete Lama?
do,
Mi vede?
do you see Lama? Can you see me? Yes. You turn to the person next to you. Can you see Lama? Do you see Lama? And say yes, yes. Are you sure? So without analyzing, without philosophizing, the reality appears to us as being objective. What I see is what is. But actually, you don't see me and you don't see me. You see your own version of me and I see my version of you. When someone says, Lama, no one ever understands me, I say, don't worry, no one will ever understand you. Because no one will ever see us the way we see ourselves. Has it ever happened that you've been judged differently from the way you see yourself? I think it's happened to everyone. It's happened many times to me because obviously when we see someone, we see that person through the filter of ourselves. So if this person did that because this person thinks that, because if I were to do that, it's because I would be thinking that. But we're not the same. And we have different assumptions. The logic just doesn't hold water. So I don't see you. I see my version of you, and everything that I perceive is subjective. I'm unable to live anything independently of my own view, and what I see is not what is. It's what I perceive as being. I don't know if that's clear. In other words, external reality exists, but it doesn't exist independently from the inner reality of each one of us. And no one is able to perceive anything independently from himself. Someone might say, oh, I've understood it's subjective, but it really, what is there? No, really, there isn't. Like the bottle. It depends where we establish the beginning and the end and the attributes of the bottle. We can call it, this is modified sand. It depends on how we see it. Just in a few words, we live in a subjective reality that appears to us as being objective, and we relate to that reality as if it were objective. This is our ignorance. Ignorance, literally in Sanskrit, is avidya. A is a negation and vid means to see. Avidya, to not see. We don't see reality in a coherent way, which doesn't mean that reality doesn't exist. Reality exists, but it doesn't exist as it appears to us. A little bit like we see a projection on TV, a movie on TV. We see someone walking. It appears as if someone's there walking. But what is it? Is it someone walking or the little pixels on a screen? Little dots of light. Is there someone actually walking? No. But it appears to us as if it were. So there's an illusory aspect. It's not that those little dots of light on the screen don't exist. They exist, but the person walking doesn't exist. So reality exists, but it doesn't exist objectively the way it appears to us. Our perception of reality, it's as if it existed objectively. This brings us to look at ourselves as if we were objective and completely independent from everything else. So we grasp and we relate to this reality as if it were objective, that creates this distance and this obsession with self-gratification and selfishness that shows up in the relationship with everything. That's becoming, our relationship becomes functional. This brings me pleasure. This brings me pain. So we develop attraction and aversion, and then from that we generate fear and anxiety, jealousy, envy, etc., etc. In other words, the root, the primary cause of our suffering is our ignorance, and is our selfishness that comes from our ignorance, where we see ourselves and reality in an incoherent way. The third seal says, watch out, your reality that appears differently from how reality is, differently than the way it appears. Which doesn't mean that reality doesn't exist. Otherwise, we end up in a nihilistic point of view. And then there's also the extreme of eternalism. But nihilism says that nothing exists, it's all an illusion. But Buddha transmits the middle way. Reality exists, but not in an autonomous, independent way. It exists in interdependent, subjective way. I know there are many, many concepts together, but here, so there's an example. Here I've rung the singing bell. How is it that we can hear that sound? There's vibration in the air that unites with your hearing, that unites also with that part of the mind that perceives the vibrations that are perceived from the hearing, that we call sound. And to that sound we attribute a meaning. We give it a name, the sound of the singing bowl, that we connect to previous memories and experiences of that similar sound. So the sound that I perceive and that you all perceive, does it exist for you independently of yourselves? It doesn't exist, because the vibration in the air is not sound. It becomes sound when it unites together with the hearing and the value attributed. In other words, the sound that I hear exists in dependence of my mind that perceives it together with my senses. And you all hear a different sound. But the sound that I hear, at the same time that it doesn't exist independently from my mind that perceives it, my mind that perceives that sound, does it exist independently from that sound that is perceived? Let me give you another example. Let's go back to the bottle. We see the bottle. The bottle that you all see, does it exist independently from your own perception? What I see and what you see, is it the same or different? It's different, because what I see depends on me. What I see is not what you see. So the bottle that I see is not the bottle that you see. You're following, right? So what I see exists in dependence on my mind that perceives it. Depends on me. Okay? Because if there weren't my mind that perceives the bottle that that I perceive wouldn't be able to exist. So the bottle that I see exists independent on my mind that perceives it. That specific thought, the mind that perceives the bottle, can it exist independently from the bottle? No. Big and small. What determines big and small? Something objective or subjective based on a comparison? Similarly, I mean, they exist, they are, they depend on each other to exist. There's reciprocal dependency. And in the past, the example would be two mountains, but let's use the example of seats. So we put two chairs in front of each other. I sit in this chair, and the other is that chair. I get up from this chair and I sit in that chair. So that chair then becomes this chair, and that chair becomes this. So this then becomes that. So this and that depend on each other to exist. It's a reciprocal dependency. This is called interdependence. The external reality that I perceive depends on my inner reality, but my inner reality depends on the external reality, and that's why they are non-dual. They are actually of the same nature, and that's a whole nother subject. But the point is, it's not that external reality doesn't exist, and it's not that inner reality doesn't exist, or that there's only one or the other, but in our ignorance, we like to divide them when instead they are one thing. That third seal talks about this, but in just a few words, it means that we live a subjective reality. We live a subjective reality as if it were objective. And this takes us, we actually live everything that exists lacks an objective, autonomous existence. It's empty. It's empty of intrinsic existence. It doesn't have its, and everything exists in dependence on that which it interacts. So I don't exist independently from everything I interact with. And this is a fundamental key. We have this tendency often to look for something that exists autonomously. Nothing exists autonomously. Anything that exists, once it exists in mutual dependence on the other things that it interacts with. Recently, I read a book on physics. It was quite simple, very beautiful. There's one chapter really talks about Buddhism, and if you're interested from a more Western point of view, it's by Carlo Rovedi, called Helgoland. And there's a marvelous chapter on Nagarjuna that talks about this specific aspect of the third seal. So the third seal of the Buddhist philosophy can be seen often in quantum physics, where reality doesn't exist doesn't exist beyond the interdependence. We could deepen this point and spend months and months on this topic. It's fundamental point. It's fundamental because this because the view that comes from our ignorance is the primary cause of our suffering. The fourth and last seal, last but not least, the last of the fourth, but not the least in importance, which literally means that beyond suffering, there is peace. Or can also be translated as nirvana is peace, or beyond suffering there is peace. What does that mean? That each one of us, without exception, has the potential, the ability to get out of his own suffering. Each one of us, because we are interdependent, and we don't exist in an objective, independent way, like a suffering being, if we're able to create the correct interdependence, we can be in a constant state of peace. So that fourth seal means it's possible, actually possible for each one of us to reach a state of peace that is long term by creating a positive interdependence, developing more love and generosity, and loving ourselves, loving others, developing a correct view of reality. And from here, all the conduct begins. So now the conduct needs to the conduct needs to be coherent with the view. It's based on an idealized view of what we want, what is my objective in life. If I live within a paradigm where my inner state is the result of exterior conditions, then my objective in life is to create perfect external conditions. In our society, what are we constantly doing? Historically, we try to create perfect conditions for the I and the mind. Even at the price of other people's conditions. I'm thinking if I should say something or not, but there's a movie that I saw some time ago. I'm not sure if I should advise it or not. You need a strong stomach, but it's a really beautiful story about samsara. It's the platform. Actually, it's a Spanish name. In Italian, it was translated as piattaforma. Il buco. In English, maybe it was the platform. It shows how we have this dynamics that when we're within our small reality, that nothing else counts. And this happens a lot. So we try to create a context that is favorable to us at the price of what happens to others. And this is the reality of the world around us. So fundamental point of a Buddhist point of view is that we need to change our inner way of dealing with external conditions and not try to create perfect external conditions. So it's about creating more humility. Without humbleness means not comparing ourselves with others, cultivating more generosity instead of miserliness, more love instead, more presence, more awareness, respect, patience, calm, balance,
dove la nostra realtà interna determina le nostre scelte e la nostra interazione, quindi determina anche la
where
realtà esterna. E questo è il sentiero principale.
this is the path to follow, and to do this we create
Cercare di evitare di agire in certi modi che
we create
questi veleni mentali.
we create rules and standards to
Cerchiamo di vivere in
develop our qualities, and they lessen our mental defilements.
e per fare questo
And to do this, we use techniques of meditation, recitation, holy, sacred art, many, many things that support us in our inner development. In essence, the Buddhist worldview and the rules of conduct and the techniques of meditation, familiarization, and the singing, music, meditation, whole sacred art, prayer, many things come together. All of this exists to support our the development of our inner qualities that actually counter-oppose our mental defilements so that we can reach a state of peace. That's what it is.
Perciò
So
a me poco mi importa se siamo buddisti o no.
I don't care much if we're Buddhist or not. What's important is how we live our lives. If we want to cultivate more hate and anger, or more love, more compassion, this is what counts in the end. Um, I I of course there's also miserliness and miserliness or generosity or attachment and satisfaction. And there's so many instruments, tools to reach to do this. There's the whole symbolism of here. But I just want to remind you, I remind you, and I remind myself as well, that the worldview is not conceptual. It's how we, on a very deep level, how we perceive and interact with reality. And these 4 points, you need time. They require time. We need time to transform our own worldview. One develops a worldview when one develops, adheres to the view that Buddha taught. When what one sees, and when it appears as it actually is, or one sees that reality is impermanent, even that it appears that it's being permanent, one sees that it's impermanent, or one doesn't, one really stops victimizing oneself and develops a deep trust within, and no longer lives the duality of inner and outer reality. And someone might say this is a very long process, and I absolutely agree. Buddha said that this complete process, from when one strongly desires to reach this inner state of peace, could last 3 eons. An eon is a very, very, very long time. Luckily, time is relative. But the key here is there's no hurry to get there, because in this modern world we have this idea that everything needs to be immediate. We have this use and throw away kind of mentality. even for our spiritual world, we want a course where in a weekend we can reach Buddhahood. We want, okay, even, a year is okay. When actually there's there's no hurry to reach our objective. There's a hurry to get walking in the right direction. When we see the reality around us, we see the conflicts, the wars, the problems, everything that's present. It's important for us to to be hurried in wanting to be part of the solution and not the problem. If that problem comes from miserliness and arrogance, I need to act with with love and generosity and less polarization. So we should all be in a hurry in starting to walk in the right direction, and on a personal level, the 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 path begins when we stop victimizing ourselves and we start loving ourselves. Loving ourselves is one of the greatest challenges in life, where we need to abandon what we like but that is bad for us and cultivate what we don't like but that is good for us. This is a great sign of self-love and care. This is a little bit, there's a Buddha, this is the view that Buddha transmitted, that over the centuries was handed down and has arrived to us. And I'm very, very happy to be able to share to the best of my knowledge. And I ask you that if you find something coherent in what we've said, to try to put it into practice, regardless of whether you see yourself as being Buddhist or not Buddhist, or religious or not religious. So it's important that we follow a coherent, virtuous life. That's fundamental. Virtuous means that which actually, with the interaction, that increases the state of happiness and well-being. That's what virtuous means. So sorry if I say this at the end, but there's just no time to lose. I mean, aside from the fact that soon we're going to die, life goes by so quickly, and we're constantly distracted with so many things. We need to live life with coherence and take advantage of every moment. I want to thank everyone. Thank you for being here together with an open heart and an open mind. And I ask you to put into practice to the best of your ability, what you can. At 3:30, we will meet for the taking of refuge, which is not a continuation of today's topic, but it's for those who want to formalize their own commitment to follow this spiritual path, follow the teachings of Buddha, and formalize it in front of me, and with the idea that this virtuous commitment needs to be protected, and that's why we formalize it. So it's a long process. So if you like to come in this afternoon, you're welcome. If you're curious and you want to come, if you like to actually take refuge, you're welcome. If you've already taken refuge and you like to renew your refuge, if you have no idea what it is and you're just curious, you're welcome to come as well. So it's time for our final dedication. So see you at 3:30. As Lama Michel Rinpoche used to say, the inner peace is the most solid foundation for world peace. So let's dedicate to inner peace of every being, so that there can also be external peace, peace in the world.
Jetsun lame kutse rapten chi namkara tinle chokchur gepa dan losan tempe drume sasum drowe munsela takto ne gyurchi kewa kuntu yanda lama rame cheki pela longche ching sadan lamge yunten rabzo ne dorje changi kopan nyurtub sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan delek shing ninsen takto delek pe koncho sumki chingi lo koncho sumki ngodrubot sol koncho sumki trashi shon
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Have a good lunch. Thank you, everyone.